All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. Today, we didn't talk much before we did this. Do we need to, talk about anything before we start?
No, I mean, Rachel sent that text to us this morning that this is her favorite book. No, you
yeah.
saw it.
Okay. Something substantial.
No.
Nope.
What did it say? It's like,
Yeah, this is my...
I mean,
Hang on.
I was joking.
I know you were joking, but...
Everyone is going to be annoyed with me now.
Right, because you always say this. She
I
said, Genesis is my new favorite book of the Bible.
Yeah.
Because every time we
is.
read a book,
Yeah.
it's her new favorite book of the Bible.
But it is brilliant. I mean, it's these same themes and patterns that you start to see over and over. I mean, so many of these stories if you grew up like me, you read them in isolation, and they're these really, iconic stories. But when you're reading all this together, you see how they all relate to one another, and you get the big picture of what's going on. It's a brilliant book, and it's, the foundation for our faith. So I love it.
All right, well, let's just go ahead and jump in. I don't know that... I know there's a lot in here, but hopefully we can get these back to a quicker, more reasonable time. I know some of these have been longer than we wanted, so... Genesis 27.
I feel like we've been warned.
Yeah. No. I like to preface that because I feel like if I don't say that, it's awkward. People man, Ted's always trying to move it along, and they're reading it back. Or Ted goes here, and then Rachel's like, well, wait. So this is just the...
Shots fired.
Yeah, I say that to say I'm trying to go
good.
faster.
We appreciate
They're trying
that.
to make sure we don't miss things.
Yes.
It's a thing we do.
Yeah. All right, so where are we at? Chapter 27?
Chapter
Yes.
27.
Jacob steals the blessing.
Yep.
Jacob the deceiver.
Yeah. Which, again, and even as we read more in here, you had said something a while ago, although in the culture here, it was the oldest son that had the birthright, and it was the oldest son that was the kind of chosen. It's interesting and incredible kind of how God uses almost the youngest or the outcast, the least likely. It's hey, I'm not going to, it's not what you guys think. So,
Over and over.
Over and over.
Yeah, that's on repeat.
Yeah.
He pushes against the cultural norms. Just like we said last year as we read through the New Testament, that it seems as though to live in God's kingdom, there's this upside-down nature, backwards nature to it. That's here in the very beginning. He is working in ways the humans don't expect him to.
Yeah.
And both of those things are worth paying attention to, whatever book of the Bible you're studying. If something is repeated over and over and over, if it's on repeat, like Lance said, it matters. It's very important. And this is very important. And then pushing against cultural norms, that's hard for us, but we have to think how it pushes against our cultural norms too.
Yeah. So just let's recap where people are after. So we were reading about Abraham a little bit. Abraham had a son Isaac, well, two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, right? Yep. And then Isaac is the one where they go up and he's about to kill him, but God's like, okay, no, he provides the goat as a sacrifice. And then Isaac has children. He marries Rebecca. Yep. And then Jacob is the younger of her first two children.
Twin boys.
Yep.
He grabs his heel.
Grabs his heel on the way out.
And his name is
Cheater.
Yeah, Cheater, Deceiver. Right.
Yeah.
And if you track along with it, there are so many parallels to Jacob and the way he acts and the serpent in Genesis 3. He is deceiving at every turn. And it's interesting because we again, I think I said this in the last one, the people in Jesus' day, they look back we're the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they keep throwing Jacob in, but he's not a good guy.
Yeah.
He's not a good, he's a deceiver, and it's the same language that's in Genesis 3, but you'll see throughout just this week and next week's reading that he deceives, and then his descendants deceive, and then he's also deceived by others. There's this all pattern of deception that you also see, which is right from Genesis 3.
And this is all amidst what we will read later on after the blessing gets kind of passed on to him, and he seems to be have some type of interaction with God where God's always listening and answering. They're conversing.
Like a real faith.
Yeah. And yet he's still this
he's strategizing
Yeah. All right. So 27, the Isaac blesses Jacob. Yeah, I mean, it's what happens. This is where he's basically saying,
So another
the
theme
one.
here is sibling rivalry, which you also see that a lot, just jealousy between those who are chosen and those who aren't. And this is another example of that. I mean, he's deceiving and he's stealing, but there's also this rivalry that leads to this decision to murder for violence.
yeah. And that's why ultimately, I mean, do you think that's why Isaac sends Jacob away to go get a wife? Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, he does send
Yeah.
him to go get a wife, but I mean, even Rebecca is the one that comes in and says, "Your brother's going to kill you.
Yeah.
I'm going to send you to my brother Laban."
Yeah.
It seems to be, it's mentioned a couple of times. I think we should draw some attention to the blessing that he gives.
Okay.
In 27, beginning in verse, what is that, 27?
Yep.
See, the smell of my son as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed, which is probably not something we would say to one another, but he's trying to conjure up like this flourishing. And I think blessing is one thing that when we hear it, there's a category in our mind that's not necessarily what the Bible is talking about. So when we hear blessing, what comes to mind, do you think, for most people?
Like monetary
Yes, stuff.
stuff.
Right, yeah. God's blessed me, I have so
Yeah.
much stuff. But in the Bible, blessing is flourishing. And so that's what is happening. Isaac is blessing Jacob. He's saying, "You will flourish. May God give you the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down. Be Lord over your brothers. And may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." There's a promise of flourishing through Jacob, even though he has deceived
Yeah.
to be here, even though actually Isaac knows that his older son shouldn't be the one that is blessed, because that's earlier in the story. God tells Rebekah, there are two nations warring in your womb, and I will bless the younger one over the older one. Like, it's known before
Yeah.
they were born. Yet Isaac wanted to go against what God wanted.
Yeah.
And
So
Jacob's trying to make this happen on his own, which every
Yeah.
time we see someone in these stories try to take God's blessing by their own power, it leads to all this conflict and destruction.
So initially, you could read this and think like, "Oh, is it really Jacob or is it Rebecca?" Because she's the one who overhears the first
Yeah.
one, and then she goes to Jacob. So is this her being decided, or is it her knowing like, no, God said that He's going to bless the young, like Jacob.
Both the parents have their favorites. So I think both the parents are sort of at fault. I don't think that we should take too much parenting advice from here. But both sons are also at fault. We already saw that Esau hated his birthright.
Yeah.
And Jacob tries to steal his birthright that he's already been promised. So it's just all these humans grasping for what God has already told them is going to happen.
Yep.
For the wrong reasons, too.
And so Rebekah heard from God that the younger would be blessed, so that's the one she favors, all of that. Yet she still tries to deceive to make it happen, not trusting God. What's interesting to me is she's the only one of the patriarchs or matriarchs in the whole book of Genesis that her death isn't mentioned. Like, she just disappears.
Even though she started out as like a new Abraham.
That's right. So it's as if her deceit has written her out of the story.
So remember this blessing when we get to the very end, whenever Jacob sees Esau again for the first time. This will sort of like see the parallels between what Jacob steals from Esau and then what he tries to give back to Esau when he sees him for the first time.
Yeah, I didn't catch that, so I'll be excited to make sure we cover that. Okay, so then Jacob is sent off to go find.
He's trying to take care of the covenant. That's
Yeah.
part of like, go here to get a wife. Don't marry the Canaanite women
Yeah.
because we're protecting the covenant promises.
Yep. And then this is where Jacob has this dream on his way there, right?
Yep.
I mean, we've heard the story like Jacob's ladder. I was reading this one. Oh, I guess that's what this is.
I just like
It's kinda
talking about
weird.
Lance's tattoo. So anytime it's relevant, I feel like Lance gets to talk about it. So.
All right.
Well, so again, the dream, he's leaving the land where he has been promised, that Abraham was promised. That's important. This happens. Oh, sorry, I didn't turn my ringer on silent.
It's all right.
So he's leaving the land. He has this encounter with God, and we read it as a ladder, but you really need to think of a staircase.
Okay.
Think of like the Tower of Babel as ziggurat. It is a stairway to heaven. And he, in this dream, sees heaven and earth connected in this place. And the angels of heaven, the Elohim, are coming and going on this ladder. And he says, surely Elohim is in this place. Like, surely God is in this place.
Yeah.
It's also, if you read this as the big picture like we're trying to do, you'll see when he leaves the land, this is the promised land. When he leaves the land, there's this dream whenever, it's this theophany whenever he sees God and sees his heaven and earth meeting together. When he comes back, again, when he comes to meet Esau, he'll have another interaction with God when he comes back into the land. So this is God's promised land where his presence is.
So this thing, like where that's the where he is in this, the place that he ended up calling Bethel, right? Mm-hmm. This is the promised land.
Yep.
That's why
Yes.
this is all happening there.
Yeah. And before this, there isn't really any indication that he has a relationship with Yahweh, with God.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost as if he meets God here. Like, oh wow, this is the place where God is.
Yep.
The God of my father and the God of his
even
father.
just notice another big theme throughout all these stories is God's patient working in people. How much patience he has with us, even though we're deceitful and arrogant and try to be self-sufficient. When you see Jacob talking after this dream, he says, oh, if God does all this, then he will be my God and I will give him a tithe. It's this very conditional prayer that you see at the beginning of his journey that changes later.
Yeah. But it is the same kind of language. This is the same
Blessing.
verbiage that God has used over and over. I mean, there's that repetition of, hey, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
The people change a lot and God never changes.
Yeah.
And again, the wrapped up in the promise is this blessing, but think of flourishing. God is saying, I will cause you to flourish. I will be the reason that you flourish. And my expectation is that then you turn that into the flourishing of all those around you.
Yeah.
And let that extend.
And that's what's about to start happening.
That's exactly what happens when
Yeah.
he goes to Laban.
So he's in Laban, and this is kind of an interesting thing where it's the same, a little bit with Rebecca. He's out, he's on his way there to people coming, like watering stuff. I mean, there's some weird. Not
There's
weird,
water. There's you see
parallels.
this again. Like there's where there's water, that's life, and then there's a wife that's going
Yeah.
to provide with abundance.
Yeah. Okay, so he goes there, and he's like, he basically falls in love with the younger.
He's very
daughter.
rash, very Jacob-like.
Yeah.
He sort of doesn't care about their customs with the well. Like he's like,
Yeah.
why aren't you like just open up the well? And they said because that's not what we do here.
Yeah.
So you sort of have this like intro to Jacob doesn't care about their customs. He's just doing whatever he wants. And then
Yeah.
you move into the story about Rachel and Leah.
And then he kind of gets tricked by their dad with Leah, which is another repetition thing. This like constant like trickery while people are either like asleep or intoxicated or.
Well, he had just done it to his father,
yeah.
and now he's being deceived.
Yeah.
Even him, his father-in-law saying, "You're, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," whatever the verse is. I mean, you sort of know, he's going to be a little bit like Jacob, and then he ends up doing the same kind of things to Jacob that Jacob has been doing to other people.
Yeah.
Deceit, trickery. You see that sort of play out.
Yeah, and then even in this whole thing, he's like, "Oh man, like what is this you've done to me? Like why?" It's like, well, what do you expect? A little bit. It makes me think of I probably can't say that on here.
What is this you have done? I mean, if you just notice some of the language, a lot of these stories are supposed to take us back in different ways to Genesis 1-3. And whenever God comes after Adam and Eve have sinned, he says, well, what have you done? He says, what have you done to me here?
Yeah.
So you sort of see this repetition of people, humans, taking what they want and deceiving or being deceived, and then the repercussions of what have you done? What have you done?
Yeah. So then, yeah. And it's just interesting to me, even here, like with when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. Just him using,
The unloved,
Yeah.
the secondborn.
yeah. I don't know. I think that was, yeah. it's an encouraging and important thing probably to remember that it's like these unlikely people that get used for his kingdom purposes.
Yeah. Every time I read this, I think of like in junior high being homesick and just turning on the TV in the daytime and Jerry Springer was on. If for those that are old enough to remember Jerry Springer, and it's like the people's lives on that show were just outside of the categories of my understanding at the time. Like,
But this is very Jerry Springer.
it is like again and again at every turn you're like,
More so.
how
Yeah.
is this happening in the Bible? How is this happening among the family that God is choosing for his promise to unfold through?
Yeah.
It's wild.
I know this is the origin story of the nation of Israel, but they're admitting it. I mean, that's how you know it's true, because why would you ever admit that this is your origin story?
Yeah, I think there was something too in here to be said with for Jacob a little bit. He could have like deceived his way out of some of the stuff. He's a pretty conniving guy, and yet there is a little bit of obedience to like, okay, if this is what you want, I'll stay and work. But let's do this. Let's make this arrangement. So with Rachel and Leah's dad. So.
He also is just, it's God always hearing and seeing those who are outcast and sidelined and lesser than. I mean, this is a theme, not just in Genesis, but throughout the entire Bible. It's just like with Hagar, it's God heard her. God heard the child crying. He hears Leah. He remembers Rachel. I mean, he sees those who are distraught, who are crying out, and he responds.
Yep. Gosh, yeah. It just gets really weird here where, again, people, and it's a cultural, I mean, obviously this is it's interesting, I guess I would say, like, the questioning of like, why have you sinned against me? And yet there's all these other things that like in today's culture would be like, dude, that's not good. Like the whole like giving of the servant girl and just all the stuff.
I don't think
it's
that's
like,
supposed to be good still.
Right.
For their culture. I mean, think back to when that has happened in previous stories, these stories keep repeating themselves and it's never a good thing.
Yeah, but why didn't they see that as bad? Why are they still
Right.
doing it?
I think that's what Ted's saying is like,
it's like
Yeah.
it is bad.
he feels wronged, and yet he's participating in the wronging of another.
Yeah.
By just
Yeah.
accepting, yeah, sure, I'll take her. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Which I think that's probably worth pointing out that each one of us do that. Like
Yeah.
we can look to see how we've been wronged, or we can point at something that is wrong, yet we accept the wrong that we do or what we're willing to live with. And maybe
That's a good word.
it's a good reminder. And
Yep.
maybe as you
the
sit
human
and
story.
do bread and reflect on what we're reading, that's a way to reflect on, all right, what am I okay with that I shouldn't be okay with?
So then we get there's all these sons to Leah, and then it gets to the point where God's like, okay, he remembered Rachel. God listened to her and opened her womb. She had a baby.
And this might be really obvious, but these are the 12 tribes of Israel. That's what's happening right here. This is what the rest of the Old Testament, these are the people of Israel, the people of God, that this is their
Come
origin
from these
story.
lines,
That's
yeah.
the 12 that's 12 sons.
So then we get to Joseph. She has Joseph.
Yes.
Uh,
I thought you meant like his story. I was like,
no, we're not there yet. We're
Jumping
not there
into
yet.
Joseph's
We're just
story
talking
yet.
about his birth story.
Ted is really moving fast
Yeah.
today.
No.
I think that at play, when we're reading some of the details, there's some cultural components to what happens that is lost on us. For example, just the way that sex is treated. It is a right for a woman, for the wife, because that's how she secures children. And children are the way she secures her place in the family. And so when you read about, like, even when Jacob marries Leah, and Laban says, well, complete the week with this one, and then you can have the other one. Like, that's all part of their cultural norm for fertility and securing, again, children. So when you see in, what was it, with the mandrakes, what chapter was that? 31, maybe? Yeah.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
30?
30.
Like, again, all that is, there is an economy here that we just don't understand. That's different because that's not the way sex works in our world.
And it's also, again, retelling some of the older stories. I mean, she's selling away her right for a piece of fruit is really what's happening. And you definitely are supposed to be thinking about Genesis 3. Oh, I'm gonna sell this for you because I'm gonna try to make this work on my own. I'm gonna try to be God in the place of God. I have no faith or surrender to who He is and His plans.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of the whole. They saw it as being fruitful, filling like descendants, that it was up to them, that they had to do it as opposed to relying on God to make it happen. As we see, ultimately, God's really the only one that is in control of authoring life with the ability to.
Whenever each of them does it on their own, it ends with violence and rivalry and jealousy and bad consequences. And even in that, God will use them and their family for His purposes. But when you see any character in these stories surrender to God completely, to just have complete faith and trust in Him and just let it be God's story, that's when you see God move in His purposes and just everyone is blessed. And there's no violence and there's no jealousy.
Okay, let's get through, because some of this was kind of weird. But ultimately, what's happening is Jacob's is like, okay, I gotta leave this place. I'm getting too big. But the guy's like, hey, no, you can't go. And he's like, it got weird with the whole like spotted lambs and like
What's
black
happening
sheep.
there?
Yeah, and the like. I mean, is he just trying to like breed the best goats to give to the guy, or that's for him?
That's for him.
It's for him. They're both deceiving each other.
Yeah. But then
And there's a lot of cultural aspects to that, but they're deceiving one another. But it is also this, one of the big themes throughout all of this is like, how do the other nations respond whenever they're blessed because they are with God's chosen people? Remember, part of the covenant is those who bless you, I will bless.
Yeah.
And so he's being blessed because of the presence of Jacob, and he's trying to take advantage of that.
Yeah. That's why he doesn't want him to leave.
He doesn't want him to leave. Yeah.
Okay, so then ultimately, Jacob does leave, and he leaves with a lot. It sounds like.
Yeah, he leaves with all his stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems as though he's trying to be honest with what he's giving. Well, he is doing all these weird things to try and get striped and spotted animals because those are the ones he would keep. But nevertheless, he doesn't keep anything he's not supposed to. But yeah, he's on the run, and Laban catches him.
But he flees, just like he fled his homeland, he's fleeing again.
Yeah. Well, but it definitely did say back here in 31, then an angel of the God said to me in a dream, Jacob, and I said, here my, and so basically God tells him, he says, arise, go from this land and return to the land of your kindred. So it's not just, he just went up and left.
Right. I think I'm just trying to hit on the character of Jacob.
Yeah.
Because we see a progression. I mean, God is patient and faithful to the nations and the world, but even in our own lives, He is. And you see this movement with Jacob that he's not there yet. But because right now he's still leaving in the night, he's still deceiving. God's telling him what to do, but he's still stealing and leaving in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
That's still who Jacob is. And you know that because his name is still Jacob.
Right.
I'm trying to think of what else did I have that was interesting here for me. So Laban catches up with him. I want to make sure I'm also not missing something, because I definitely did feel like as I was reading this stuff, it does just read as a story, and you just get lost in like, it's like a story, and like, okay, wait, no, that's something.
It's a really detailed story too.
Something is supposed to be happening here. Something should be taking something away from this.
Well, I think that part of this is like, so Laban was trying to force him to stay, was trying to deceive him to receive the blessings that were coming through Jacob. And then he finally realizes, I need to have a covenant with you. They don't trust each other still. Like you say at the end, like, may God be the judge, may God watch both of us. But he knows that the right way to receive God's blessing that's on Jacob is to have a covenant relationship with him.
And so they make a covenant.
They make a covenant.
And it's weird, like this is another illustration of a different, I mean, it's not the same way that we saw other covenants made, but maybe a little bit, where they say, where was that in verses? I forget where that was. They made the heat. Is this?
They made a pile of stones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, again,
It's at the end of
a covenant's
31.
going to have conditions to it and
Yeah.
sides, and they're just like, this is my part of the agreement, and that's your part of the agreement, and then there's a symbol of the covenant, and the symbol that here is just the heap of stones.
Yeah. So I guess that's what I'm trying to see, like the covenant that they made with each other.
That they wouldn't cross
They
over
wouldn't-
that place to do one another harm,
Okay.
which is really the biggest component to it.
Yeah.
They're not going to go after each other in a way to harm the other one.
But there's a sign, there's a sacrifice, there's this covenant agreement.
Okay. And then the heap and the pillar. That's what I said. Remember how you were talking about, like, in these covenants, like you like walk through and it's like, well, if this is what's going to happen to you, kind of, because there's one that's always
Through the
greater than the
sacrifice,
other.
yeah. Well, there's two kinds of covenants. So there's a covenant between two equals, which that's what this is.
Okay.
And then there would be a covenant between
Greater
a
and
king
lesser.
and a lesser nation, and that would be the suzerain vassal covenant, which is what God has with Abraham. So this would be between two equals.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to see covenant throughout all of these chapters.
Okay, so then Jacob's like, all right, cool. I'm kind of free to go. Made this covenant, but then he's like, probably starts to get nervous. Like, uh-oh,
Right.
if I go home, what's my brother gonna think? How's this all gonna work out?
I mean, his brother who wanted to murder him.
Yeah, even though it had been a long time.
20 years.
Yep. So this is him kind of getting back into a little bit of this, not conniving way, like trying to think about, like, oh, how am I going to make this work? Because when they send people ahead, they're like, oh, your brother's on his way here with like 400 dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Jacob at the end of himself. I mean, he's even like with the herds that he was trying to, like, I'm going to make spotted cows for me, so that even though he's trying to deceive me, I'm smarter than him. He's been very, very self-sufficient, right? He sort of schemed his way or worked his way to get his blessing. And you get here, and there's just not a lot he can do on his own.
Yeah.
And so you see Jacob coming to, okay, I need God. Not, okay, if God does this, then he'll be my God, but I need God. That's where we come to.
But even amidst that, I still feel like this is him trying to be like, all right, I'm gonna take the best of
Yes.
this, and I'm gonna send this group out, and then this group and this group. So when he gets to
then
this
the women
one-
and the children
yeah, and
and
then the
the- yeah.
women, yeah. So it's like
Put them first, yeah.
all this stuff that he's still trying to,
He's in self-preservation mode.
He
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
which is then where we get this famous story here where Jacob wrestles with God, which is kind of a weird. I guess it's like you said earlier. You know, we read this in like snippets, but in the context of all this, and maybe it was because finally Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. This is finally he's at the end of his rope, and here he is. He has this encounter where he wrestles with God all night long.
As he comes back into the land.
Yeah.
Again, so he has these encounters with God when he leaves the land and when he comes back.
Yeah.
And that is strange for us, both wrestling with, and Hosea says this is an angel of God, the angel of the Lord, that he's wrestling with. So that sounds weird to us, but in their context, that wasn't as weird. He wanted the blessing of God. And instead of just grasping it on his own, instead of scheming his way to it, he had to wrestle with God. He was in his place because this was the place of God, the promised land. And he had to wrestle and be with God in order to have it.
Yeah. So, like, was this like you think a physical wrestling with, like, I mean, it says it's dark and he doesn't know who this other guy's, but they're just wrestling and he's not
Yeah.
giving up.
I think it's both. I mean, I think it's also emotional too, because you see at the end of this, he, gives him his new name, which means there's a character change. So it's something more than physical going on. Definitely. I mean, he's definitely emotionally and spiritually wrestling with God this night before he goes back into the promised land and really becomes Israel, the father of the nations.
Yeah. What's interesting is we can get into that the next week, because this is the tail end of this week. But yeah.
I mean, he says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you've been striven with God, with men, and have prevailed. I mean, that a change in name always means a change in character. So this is really a defining moment for Jacob, and you'll see that throughout the next chapters. He's a different person. He's a different man. Now, his life and his legacy continues to replay itself in his descendants, but he's different starting now.
Yeah, and what's interesting, though, is this isn't like the first encounter that he had. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I mean, you think like when we come to faith, or we have these, you know, I'd say experiences where we feel much closer to God. I mean, yeah, they do mark us some more than others, but it is interesting that this seems to be the one that really changes the trajectory a little bit more so than others. I don't.
A little. I mean, also the story of Israel as a people is personified in Jacob. If you think about it, I mean, they're now called Israel as a nation, which means to wrestle or to strive with God and with people, and that is going to be their story. It's a foreshadow of the people of Israel will wrestle among themselves, with others, with other nations, and with God. And God will continue to be patient, and God will continue to say, no matter what, you're my people. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be consequences for the things they do and all that, but it sets up the rest of the story, that this is how he got his name, with the type of character that he is. Is that it?
I think that's it.
There's one more thing.
One more thing.
One more thing we should do.
Okay.
And that's jump to Jesus.
Okay.
Just for a minute before we go. So if we go back to the story of when Jacob left the land and he sees the ladder, I think we did this when we read John last year, but it's worth going to John and reading Jesus using that story real quick. So I'm going to be in John chapter 1 in the New Testament. So it says, the next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, follow me. And Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So he's telling him, like, we found the Messiah. And Nathanael says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? So it would be like, pick a place you're prejudiced against, or like, can anything good come out of that? Philip said to him, come and see. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? And Jesus answered him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. And Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. And Jesus answered him, now this is where he goes all the way back to this story in Genesis. Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. And he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And so these people, they look back to this story, they look even back to this land and this place, and they say, like, certainly this is the place of God. Certainly this is the connection between heaven and earth. And Jesus grabs all of that history and he says, I am the connection between heaven and earth. I am the place where God is, because he is God.
Yeah.
And flips their understanding, and should flip our understanding of the connection, heaven come to earth, and how we can know the place of God and who he is and all of that. So all that's wrapped
Even
up in Jesus.
Nathanael, I mean, an Israelite, true Israelite, so Israel, this is where he gets his name, in whom there's no deceit. So he's like, you are the Israelite, but there's no deceit in you, so you recognize who I am.
Yeah. That's some good stuff. That's kind of cool how...
It's really there. It's all there.
Yeah.
Jesus was right. It is all throughout Scripture.
Well, thank you for listening to the Bible Reading Recap Podcast. Remember, as we read and reflect on God's Word together, we're growing in our commitment to be a people of hope with our one heart fully surrendered to Jesus. You can subscribe to receive additional resources to help you study the story of Scripture at clearcreekresources.org. We'll see you next week.